Hello everyone, welcome back to BlenderDiplom.com. I'm Gottfried Hofmann, and in this tutorial you're gonna learn how to create this wonderful God ray effect or crepuscular ray effect you see here. It's purely 2D, all post-processing, all in the compositor, and thus you can use it with any image you want or with any 3D scene you want. So it's also different from the other two God ray effects I have already shown on BlenderDiplom. So for example, it differs from the one that uses cycles volumetrics, and it's also different from the one that's using spot lamps in Blender Internal. The effect is based on a new node that was introduced in Blender 2.72. It's called Sunbeams, and this makes this effect really easy to set up. Here you see the final node setup. This tutorial is mostly about the compositor. And the important part is actually this node here, Sunbeams. And I will show you what all the settings are about, like what are these two up here and the ray lengths, and how to animate it in a meaningful way, so it really makes sense for your effect. Also, this tutorial will use a very basic scene for the effect. You can see it down here, and this is what you can download as a starter blend file. But I will also show you how to create this basic scene here at the beginning, so if you don't want that, you can skip the next 5 minutes using the chapter marks on BlenderDiplom.com and simply use the starter file, which is available on BlenderDiplom.com as well. Here I am now in Blender 2.72. Let me quickly delete the cube and the lamp here and look at the scene from the top in orthographic mode, adding some text to the center. Here, BlenderDiplom, and this text should get another font. So let me go to the font text settings, and down here I can change the font. I will use Roboto because this is a cool and free font. You can get it on the internet by searching for Roboto font. And the only thing I want to change here is the spacing of the letters, because later on I want to use an outline. Now let me go to the world settings and turn the horizon color to black. Then let me go to the material settings, give this a material, and I'll just give it a diffuse color and shadeless. That's it. Now, when I turn on the viewport, I can see this font here in real time because I'm using shadeless rendering, and very important, I'm using the Blender internal render, not cycles. So if your rendering is default to cycles, switch over to Blender. It really makes sense to use the Blender internal render at this point. Then let me go back here to the render settings, and there is post-processing edge. Let me simply turn this on and give it a white color. Now I got this nice white edge around my logo. This is a feature that might become deprecated in the future, so if you don't see this feature here, choose freestyle instead, and that should be perfect in this case. And for the dimensions, I'm using 50% of 720p. And one last thing I want to add to the text before I'm going to compositing is I want to add a texture. And I'm using a clouds texture. The idea behind this is that it looks like something is reflecting in the text, even though it's completely 2D. And for this, this clouds texture is really handy. Let me turn on ramp for the colors, so it's no longer ugly and pink, and here you see that everything is somewhat stretched and it's texturing single faces. This is because mapping is still set to UV, and the day-field UVs for a text are made like this. I don't want this, so let me switch to generated instead. Now I got really nice clouds here, and by making things sharper I will get a look that's more like something is reflecting maybe some lights from the distance. So here I got the clouds now. Let me do small adjustments. First of all, let me reduce the depth. This will render faster and make this look less noisy in here. And then let me increase the size until it looks like this is actually a reflection. Like this is actually looking quite good, but maybe like this. This is actually looking really good for the reflections. And for the reflection look, I also should turn down the influence, of course. 0.2 should be totally enough. Next thing I want to do is I want to add some animation. For this, I will use offset. So here, this setting here, because this will make the clouds move to the left and to the right on the logo. So I will use right click and then insert single keyframe. And then let me go to the animation settings, here using the graph editor, and add something really cool that is a generator modifier on my material keyframe here. So here you see the keyframe at the moment, nothing is changing, but after I'm adding the modifier generator, it's now actually a very steep line. And that's because the modifier is changing it in the way that for each one frame I go forward, it will go one, the texture will move one Blender unit to the left. Of course, that's way too fast, so let's change this to 0.01. And now I got a nicely moving Blender unit, Blender texture. I mean, the clouds texture is moving nicely over the BlenderDiplom logo. So that's it about animation. Now let me set up the camera. For this, I'm going to solid view, and here under view, align active camera to view. Now we got the camera here, but I want this to look differently onto the scene. At the moment it's looking in perspective view, and this will give a slight distortion to the text, and I don't want this, so let me go to the camera settings, and up at the very top I can also select orthographic. And now I got a text that is totally not distorted, and it will totally look like it is 2D. And one thing I will also change is here in the render settings, let me turn on border. So now when I render, only the things inside this view border, that is my camera, gets rendered. This will speed things up a little bit. And for the last thing I want to change is here in the layer settings for the render layers, I want to turn off sky, thus making the background transparent. Now I got everything set up to go from the default view to the compositing. Here let me turn on rendered view once again. Or actually, I don't need this here. And then turn on use nodes and backdrop. Now I will also render this once. So I got this render result down here, and up here I want to add a viewer node by holding Shift and Control and left click. This is exactly the state of the blend file you can download for starters. If you don't see anything, simply render image. Now we got something in the backdrop and down below in render result. Let me show you the new node now. It's under Shift A, filter sunbeams, and let me connect this first to the logo directly. You don't see anything because the ray length is set to 0. So let me increase this, and now here you got the effect. So the ray length basically is setting how long the rays are that are shining out of the pixels of your image. And it's really working like there was a virtual light source behind your image that's shining through, and as if your image was a stencil, like maybe inside a carton, and the carton is full of dust and the light from outside is shining through the stencil. Really cool effect. And you can change the position of the virtual light source by simply changing the value for X and for Y up here. And now let me change the input for the sunbeams node, because I don't want to use this image here, because we have these red parts and all the alpha stuff. I don't like this. I want to use the alpha channel, you can see here, because this is simply black and white, and so the result will be a grayscale image here, which we can later on colorize. Now let me animate the position of the virtual light source, but first let me put the Y position back to 0.5, which is exactly the middle, and then let's put the X position to minus 0.1. That's right, you can actually move the sunbeam's position outside of the image. So now the virtual light source is roughly here and shining through. Really nice. Let me first go to the first frame of the animation with Shift and left arrow, and then hover over the X value here and hit I for insert keyframe. Then let me set the end frame to 100, and then Shift right arrow for the last frame. And here I'm going plus 1.1. And I again. So now I got a pretty nice animation, but I'd also like the rays to animate. So I want them in the middle to be as long as I want them, or as long as possible. So this would be roughly at frame 50. So let me say 0.4 as ray length, and I for insert keyframe. But at the beginning I want them to be 0, so they are starting to grow out of my logo. So let me go to the first frame, shift left arrow, and set the ray length to 0, I for insert keyframe, and now we got this nice starting effect here. And at the end, I want them to not grow smaller again using the ray length. I want to keep the ray length and instead fade them out. And the reason for this is because this will look a little better. Here you see a video of what's happening at the end when the rays are not fading out but rather getting shorter again by animating the ray length. And now check out how it compares to a video where they are fading out directly. And I think using both of these effects combined in one video with the fade out at the end is looking a little bit better. That's why I'm going to animate the alpha image here. And I will simply let the BlenderDiplom fade out, and thus the rays will also fade out. How can I do this? Well, simply using a color mix node and mix it with black. So here I'm choosing pure black, and now you see it's gone. The image is gone. But if I move the factor back to 1, it's here again. So factor 0, image is here, factor 1, image is gone. And the factor is actually 0 top input, 1 bottom input. So I will animate this factor here, and let me start animating it roughly at frame 70. And then at the end, shift right arrow, factor to 1, click and enter 1, I again. Now we got a really nice animation, and now I want to integrate this nice animation for the God rays with my logo. For this, let me first switch to a frame where we got a really nice view of our God rays. And now let's also look at it through the viewer. And to combine this with the render layers, I will use an alpha over node, color alpha over, simply for the reason because this will look a little better than other ways to do it. So let me put the sunbeams below, no, up, they will be the background, and the image of my render layer to the bottom, because this will composite it over my background. So here I got it, and it's actually looking pretty nice. Let me put this here into viewer node as well. And it's really like the effect is all behind this, and this is not really realistic, but it's artistic and looking really, really good. So now I want to colorize the strokes of light we got here in the background. And for this, I will use the color balance node, because this will give us a really nice gradient of different colors. So I will put this in between. And now for what I can use the color balance node, well, for example, I can give the dark parts a rather dark blue color and the light parts a light blue color. And I can even brighten up the light parts, which is also looking pretty good. And maybe I can also change the midtones, but I don't want to here in Gamma. And now let me make the black background a pure black. And for this, I will use alpha over again and put it below, and in the top, simply black. And now we got a really nice looking effect here, but it's still not completely finished. See at the end? There you only have the logo, only the text and nothing more. And I want a subtle background behind the text, and for this I will simply blur it using Shift A, filter, blur. And let me select fast Gaussian, because this will look a little better for what I want to do. And turn on relative, X 10% and Y 10% as well. And aspect correction for Y. Now we got it perfectly for our background, but the colors are not exactly what I want, because I want the background to be also bluish. So let me use color curves this time. Why curves? Well, here I got the 3 channels. I can, for example, remove red. And now it's becoming greenish, so let me increase the blue a little bit. And then I can still change everything by using the altogether colors and make it darker, for example, to make the effect more subtle. And how do I combine it with the BlenderDiplom I got here before? Well, for this I will simply use an node color mix and then add. So let me add this to the BlenderDiplom I had here. select add. And in the end, now I have my background, and the background will also be automatically be animated because I have blurred the logo itself, and on the logo we have the slide animation of the texture. This will look very, very good actually. And now for the really great effect we get, and that is in the middle, when we got our God rays, this effect we just made by blurring it and adding it back together gave it a little extra punch. So take a look at how it looked without this blur in the background and now with the background blurred. Look, all the God rays also got a little extra blur and a little extra punch, and now the effect is looking really like I wanted to. Also more colors, better colorized, cooler, everything is fine. So this is it. We're at the end of the tutorial. I really hope you liked the new Sunbeams node in Cycles, in the Blender Compositor, Blender version 2.72, don't forget it. And I really hope that you will make something cool out of the tutorial. So if you create something on your own, please go to BlenderDiplom.com, check out the tutorials, and in the comments show me your results. I'm always eager to see what other people are doing with the things I'm teaching them. And also, don't forget, happy blending.